Well, hello to Doug Bates. Very nice to meet you. Doug, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about how you might be Pirsig corner adjacent?
Well, I certainly write about Pirsig some. Um, so, what I write about is mostly Pyrrhonism, which is one of the lesser known ancient Greek Hellenistic philosophies. It was a competitor to Stoicism, which has recently enjoyed a tremendous resurgence, and also Epicureanism. Uh, Pyrrho was a Democritean philosopher who was a member of Alexander the Great's traveling court. And he traveled to India on the Indian campaign, spent approximately a year and a half in Taxila, India, where he encountered Buddhist philosophy. And he brought some of that back with him to Greece as part of Pyrrhonism. My exposure to Pirsig was when I was like 16 years old in high school. Which have been 1976. I picked up Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which was only a couple of years old then.
Yeah.
And I was completely blown away by it. Um, I have read that book over and over again over the years. And my work in philosophy frequently touches on themes that came up in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Now you're retired now, but were you a professor of philosophy? Was that your book?
No, I just stumbled into this. You might think so. I certainly had that programming coming from Zamm, and because of that programming, I became substantially involved in Zen Buddhism in the early '90s, and continue to practice. Continue to consider myself a Buddhist, but I have there are some things that I don't think quite work about Buddhism. And I got attracted to the resurgence of interest in Stoicism. So I started reading the Stoics, and this reminded me greatly of Pirsig's interest in Aristotle and and the Presocratics. And so I began reading very widely, and I eventually came upon Sextus Empiricus' book, Outlines of Pyrrhonism. And I picked it up and said, wow, this guy is really kind of like a Zen master, except he speaks in the very rationalistic language of Greek philosophy. And he seems much more accessible than in describing some of the same things that Buddhism tries to describe.
Accessible meaning like for the Western sensibility?
Well, I guess at least for me, but yes. So, if you, even have a casual acquaintance with Zen, you'll hear things like, don't believe everything you think. Beginner's mind, not knowing. But if you inquire, well, how do you achieve that? Then the answers become not, terribly clear or prescriptive, I think. Whereas in Pyrrhonism, which is trying to achieve the same sort of mental state, the answers are clear. Okay, here's a program. Here's a logical structure to it all.
Because our minds are a little bit more linear and logically structured in a different way from, like, just say, an Eastern approach.
Yeah, I mean, The East is a very big place.
I know there's a problem with phrasing it.
um, I don't know any Eastern languages, but I have some passing familiarity with how they work, and Sanskrit and Pali are pretty precise languages, and whereas Chinese, written Chinese, is a very and same with Japanese, a very ambiguous language. I remember once when I was in Japan, I would say something in English that seemed to be perfectly clear, and the bilingual person had no problem understanding what I said, and then they had to explain it to someone else in Japanese, and like, wow, they sure seem to be going back and forth a lot trying to understand what I thought I said, which was pretty simple. But that's because Japanese is a relatively ambiguous language. And of course, it's not ambiguous about everything. Japanese famously, in terms of interpersonal relationships, are very precise, with regard to your relationship to the person you are speaking about, in ways that English is, whatever, he's my cousin. So, I think in the Far Eastern tradition we have some linguistic issues that have made it difficult to express certain ideas. In my book, I quote something. It's just transliterated in English, and it's from the famous Zen master Huang Po. And I said, now if I can, can pull it from memory, it says, "Dharma, original Dharma, not Dharma. How can Dharma be Dharma? I now present this not Dharma. I did mangle that a bit, but you get the sense of, he's saying something where he is repeatedly contradicting himself in order to try to make clear what he's talking about. I think something like this can be said more clearly in English.
So they're trying to like kind of shock or lurch us into some kind of state of mind, whereas
Huang Po is forced to do this because of the limitations of language. Dharma conveys many different meanings simultaneously, and in this paragraph, he has to affirm some of those meanings and strongly deny other of those meanings, and he has no words that allow him to do it.
So that's sort of like a koan in a way.
Well, I think that is one reason you have the koan tradition, because koans are essentially case studies, and their phrasing is ambiguous, and so the ambiguity of it and the low dependence upon language emphasize, do you really get what I'm talking about here? Because if you get it, you'll be able to respond in a way that is non-obvious but makes sense.
I'm curious about how Pirsig called them case studies. I'm still having a hard time with that term. Can you explain that?
Well, the word koan literally comes from legal case studies.
Okay, can you describe more what that would be? Because I think that's where I get tripped up.
Well,
maybe I don't know what that is.
You mean a legal case study or a koan?
Well, what a case study is and how a koan is a case study.
Um, so, like in law school or business school, which both use the case method heavily, you're presented with a situation
Mhm.
and background information on that situation. And as a student, you're asked to um, provide guidance or resolution. Um, so now a koan, of course, everyone who's read Pirsig should be familiar with the koan mu, which he speaks of quite at length, and doesn't have a good answer for, despite giving answers. But that koan is, a monk asked Jiao Shu, does a dog have a Buddha nature? Jiao Shu replied, mu. That's the case. And your answer is, I mean, in a sense, is based on how you understand it, but it's trickier than that.
Well, that gets me a lot closer. Thank you.
Okay.
So you sent me an email, and in it is sort of your, let's just say, your proposal. It is well known. I'm going to read it,
Uh-huh.
if you don't mind. It is well known. Phaedrus identified with the sophists. It seems he did so because they are the only ones Phaedrus was aware of, who were opposed to Aristotle. My thesis about Pirsig is that if they had known about the Pyrrhonists, he would have chosen to identify with them rather than the sophists.
Mm-hmm.
That's the essence of your book, as I understand it.
Well, that's not the essence of my book. That's the essence of my thesis about Pirsig.
Okay.
Um, scholarship about the Pyrrhonist was very, very thin until maybe about 20 years ago.
That's amazing.
Yeah, they were largely overlooked, even though Sextus Empiricus had a huge influence in the late Middle Ages. I mean, it was his. So you may be familiar with Michel de Montaigne, and Montaigne had a revelatory experience reading Sextus Empiricus, and he became a Pyrrhonist. His most famous of all of his essays is An Apology for Raymond Simbon, which is about Pyrrhonism. And so, uh, uh, so Montaigne got his hands on a copy of Sextus Empiricus a few years after Sextus became available, in print rather than manuscript form. And this set off in Europe, particularly France, the crise Pyrrhonienne, which was a reaction to these um, revolutionary Greek ideas that were found in Sextus Empiricus. And that had a substantial effect on the Renaissance and Enlightenment thinking. To go back to Pirsig, though, you had to be pretty geekish in the 1950s or 60s to be looking around and find Sextus Empiricus. And there's no trace that I know of that Bob Pirsig did so. Certainly, though, the sophists were well known to him, with both Aristotle and Plato talking about the sophists, and the sophists are the forerunners of the Pyrrhonists. The sophists were proto-skeptics, who questioned that we knew things. Most famously here is Protagoras, saying, man is the measure of all things, those that are and those that are not. Yes, it is explicitly about relativism, but relativism in skepticism are closely intertwined, particularly in Pyrrhonism. I mean, Pyrrhonism, yes, it's usually called a form of skepticism, but it's also a form of relativism. So Pirsig was identifying with the sophists, and I think if he had been aware of the Pyrrhonists, he would have found that they had a much more sophisticated position.
Well, you said that in your writings, you said that actually the Pyrrhonists didn't have what's the difference with relativism in the Pyrrhonists and in the sophists?
Sure. So speaking, Protagoras, he's saying that what is true for person A can be false for person B. And therefore, Protagorean philosophy violates the law of non-contradiction, which of course upsets Aristotle. Whereas in Pyrrhonism, I'm going to back up here. You're probably familiar with Plato's allegory of the cave.
Yes.
This is a very important allegory, and it's related to the Greek conception of truth. The Greek word for truth is something revealed, something unhidden. And the allegory of the cave is about getting to the truth, getting out of that cave and seeing the truth in the sunlight. What's going on in the cave is this shadow play. The Greeks, the Greek term for the shadow play, which was heavily used in Greek, is fantasia. I'm sure I've mangled the pronunciation of that. I've never heard anyone say the word, but I've seen it in text a million times. When it's translated into English, it is normally translated as the appearances, unless you're reading a Stoic text, and it'll be translated as an impression, which there's reasons for that. But anyway, so the Greeks were very aware that everything they experienced, appeared to them, but what was the truth behind all of this? They did not accept, the sensation, the sense data as, naive realism, as, being obviously true. The exception to that ultimately were the Epicureans, who did do that, but everybody else didn't. So the Pyrrhonists say, all right, we live in this world of appearances. Okay, we do not know whether the appearances tell the truth or lie. I can experience an appearance and think it's one thing. You can experience it and think it's something else. All right. Neither of us knows the truth. So we're just reporting what appears to us. We're allowed to contradict on that because it's true that this appeared to me and that appeared to you. That help you?
It does help me. You said that the sophists have more of a relativistic notion that is similar to postmodernism, which would,
yes.
I guess, would mean something like, in Pirsig, you can't say that he says there is no good and bad, even though good and bad is relative in the situation. That good is absolutely a thing because you experience it. You experience all of it. Whereas I think in postmodernism, it's just there's no morality, there's no good or bad, and there's a big difference, I think.
Yes. So the Pyrrhonists note that good and bad do not exist by nature.
Yes.
We would say, they're not objective things, that they are mind-dependent things. Now, that doesn't mean, because they're in minds that they're unreal, but they have a different kind of reality than a chair.
So, but I think what you were saying, and there's a few quotes I want to read from your writings, but I think what you were saying is that that kind of, you use relativism for your own end versus relativism, like the sophists. This was the complaint that Socrates had about the sophists in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, is that they, that they would use rhetoric for their ends rather than for the truth.
Yes, and as Pirsig pointed out, Socrates was not above that either, or at least Plato wasn't.
Yeah, well, Plato. That's what I mean.
Right. Yes.
So there's some. So
and if you've read The Clouds, by the way, Socrates was accused of the same thing.
If I read the what?
Oh, The Clouds. It's a ancient comedy by Aristophanes that was staged about 20 years before Socrates' execution.
I see. Yeah, I haven't gotten that deep. I'm just
okay.
I've been exploring Plato for a few years, but haven't gotten there yet. So thank you. Now there's a few. I want to riff off some quotes, or maybe you can, from your book that I just love. So you wrote, you had an article, and I love the title. It's called "Robert Pirsig and the Ancient Greeks, who also knew Aristotle was messing with our minds."
Yeah, I like the title. Yeah. It's catchy.
And your let's see. So your conclusion of that article is that Pirsig can help us undo some of the damage that Aristotle has done. Specifically, let me read this from that paper. Aristotle rearranged the hierarchy of philosophy, but put substances in second place after the true. Reason, logic, and knowledge became the primary concerns. He demoted the good to a minor branch of knowledge called ethics. This became the new Western worldview and survives to this day. It certainly does.
Mm-hmm.
Arete was
pretty much straight from Pirsig.
Yeah. Arete wasn't exactly killed, as Pirsig claimed, but it was conspicuously absent from Aristotle's thinking and appears only as a minor topic in ethics. Replacing Arete was the new goal, to create an endless proliferation of information about the substances and call this knowledge. You could almost say that AI has taken this to the nth degree, that it's just gleaning this information from substances and, creating, it's like proliferating this problem into the future in a way.
Well, by substance here, I mean Aristotelian substance, which is a thing's essence. Aristotle was a critic of the Platonic forms, and let's see. So, Plato thought all, physical objects kind of emulated the forms, but didn't have the forms in them. That's probably mangling it. But Aristotle thought that each thing had an essence, and part of that essence was such that you could use it to divide one thing from another or to define it. Whereas if you think about Buddhist thinking on what I would argue is the same subject, on Atman, no thing has self-essence, including us most particularly. Everything is dependent upon other things, and ultimately everything is dependent upon everything else. And it is these dependencies which define things, and not anything essential to the thing.
So someone else who I've had on this channel, who I've spoken to a few times, said that that Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance is really about relationship. The quality is that quality drives the relationship, and everything occurs in that instant of relating. So that would be, I think that that's like Aristotle saying, no, there's stuff out there. There's everything,
Mhm.
things have their essences. They're already there. It doesn't matter when are born into the world, they're always going to be the same because they have these essences. Whereas Pirsig is saying, quality creates temporary things that seem like they have essences, but they're actually relationships.
Yes, yes. I mean, essences are a projection of the mind onto things so that we can make sense of them. All right. Uh, but they aren't in the things themselves.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, it's apparent in physics. They've been trying to get to the bottom of it and
Mhm.
failed spectacularly. We still are no closer to the essence
Right.
of
Yep.
matter than we ever have been.
Yep. Every time we, pull away the cloak that is the barrier to understandings. Oh, this rabbit hole just keeps going deeper.
To the point where you have to invent things, right? You have to invent mathematical concepts to
Yeah.
substitute for the fact that you're not finding it.
Yeah, I have no idea. uh, you know, I, with regard to my writing, I tend to focus on the self-help aspects of it and not the scientific implications. I've
Well, here,
already bitten off more than I can chew.
well, here's something. Okay, let's go back to your book because you're an expert in this field for sure. Okay, so you said about Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, the ideas in it are just as relevant now as when the book was written. As it
Mm.
says on the back cover, the book is indeed a penetrating examination of how we live and how to live better. That's beautiful.
Yeah,
Can you?
yeah, and it's been over 50 years, and you can hardly go into a bookstore and still not see it on the shelf.
That's true.
Uh, Not many books. I mean, it's clearly become a classic now. Not many books achieve that.
So for so 50 years ago, yeah, almost 50 years ago, you read it for the first time. So you've had
Hmm.
many decades of having this, in your being. How
Hmm.
has this book helped you live a better life, and how has it influenced you?
I suppose the easiest thing is how did it influence me? Um, so I read the book when I was 16. It probably the weird reason I picked the book up was it sounded like it might be about motorcycles. Um, but, I grew up in West Virginia, and I'd been riding a motorcycle for several years by the time I was 16. Uh, Motorcycles were very popular there, and they were popular in my family. And my uncle had, it was a dirt bike, we could just go out and go on country roads and mountain trails and whatnot. And in rural West Virginia, this is summer fun, and it's a good family sort of thing to do. Uh, so I picked it up. Okay, it's got something to do with motorcycles. That's cool. Um, Now, one thing the book inspired me to do was to spend the summer after I graduated from college motorcycle touring the U.S.
Hmm.
And for part of that trip, um, I did not do it in the same direction. I I started in New Hampshire, uh, uh, headed down to Georgia, out to Texas. Then I worked my way a lot through the Rockies, back into Arizona, then up through California and Oregon and Washington. And then from there, I headed east towards Minnesota and Minneapolis, in fact, before finally ending up in West Virginia.
So you had a pilgrimage along some of the route.
Yes, yes. You know, I I'd never seen anybody try at that point. Exactly where did Pirsig go? But I certainly remembered things like Crater Lake,
Mhm.
and yeah, and a few things like that, and made sure I visited those spots.
Did you was there anything obscure that you managed to run across that was in the book?
No, no, the it was a fun trip,
Mhm.
and I'm really glad I did it, because where in your life can you take an entire summer off and just travel? You can do it, when you're in your late teens and early 20s, and then I suppose you can do it in your 60s when you're retired, and um, you just can't do. I mean, I think about trying to do that trip now. It's like, yeah, I don't think I can handle that's all that sleeping on the ground I did.
You did some of the camping, huh?
Yeah, it was almost all camping.
Did you do the did you do Beartooth Pass
No, I didn't.
and the windy road?
Um,
That's really a
there,
challenge,
there,
huh?
there is this one place in Idaho where there is a sign that says "Caution, winding road next like 77 miles." That Pirsig did go through, and I stopped at that point and got the iconic photo of my motorcycle. Couldn't take a photo of me. We couldn't take our selfies back then. Uh, and I do have a photo of that spot
Mhm.
somewhere.
Well, in one of your articles, there's a picture of a man in a motorcycle from back. Is that you?
Yeah. No, that's just stock art I picked up. Uh, I really should dig through the old photos and try to find some old photos of my trip. But I mean, there aren't photos of me. It's like iconic spot, picture of my motorcycle.
Yep, because of the obvious problem of no cell phones back then.
Right. And taking pictures was expensive back then,
Yeah,
and
yes, it was.
mhm, and bulky. Oh, if you're on a motorcycle, while it's a lot like hiking. You don't really worry too much about the weight because the motorcycle handles that fine, but you do not have very much space.
Yes. I mean, when you see those pictures of Pirsig, they put as much as they could on the back of the motorcycle.
Exactly. That's how you do it.
So you have written, I don't think we've mentioned your book yet. It's called Pyrrho's Way, the ancient Greek version of Buddhism.
Hmm.
So now I noticed that your writings that you sent me links to are from last year. This book is what year did
It's
you write?
published in 2020.
Okay. So
Uh,
so
mhm.
what motivated you to do that?
Well, as I was speaking beforehand, I became interested in Stoicism, so I began reading not only, I first started reading some of the modern interpreters of Stoicism, of which there are now more than you can shake a stick at.
Oh yeah, it's a sort of a modality these days, right?
Yes, right. Uh, go into any bookstore that has a philosophy section, and like half of it's Stoicism now.
That's funny, isn't it? It
Hmm.
seems to fit into the modern, modern like uh, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and suffer until kind of.
There that well could be an important part of it. Uh, I think there are some other things, if I may digress on this subject. One is the ongoing collapse of interest in Christianity
Mhm.
in Western society. Um, you know, we we are that creates a hole uh,
Yeah, so
in.
this is a topic of a lot of discussions.
Hmm. And Stoicism is one of the things that you can use to fill that hole. Arguably, Christianity was heavily influenced by Stoicism, and uh, the modernized form of Stoicism, um, fits well with the Western rationalist conception because it was Western rationalist too. And its ethics are pretty similar to Christianity. So, it's easy for a, non-theistic Westerner to say, oh, I understand that. I click with that. I see the virtue to it. And so it is an easy sell. I mean, it's Stoicism, Stoic thought is deeply part of our culture. And if you look back at the era that was immediately pre-Christianity, Stoicism was the primary, Western philosophical thought. I mean, Stoicism dominated the field. Yeah, there were Epicureans and there were a few Pyrrhonists and a few Platonists and Aristotelians, but the Stoics set the tune. Everybody was really reacting to the Stoics at that point.
That makes sense. So people maybe have a sense, they've put aside Christianity, but the need still is there. The tradition. So somehow people relate to that because they have inherited the Christian sensibility.
Sure. Yeah,
I mean, they relate to that versus the disease that so many people have of believing in a god or having a religion. This sort of fills the gap in that way.
Mm-hmm. A fully fleshed out religion is a philosophy of life with a particular kind of metaphysics and theology to it. Stoicism is a philosophy of life, and ancient Stoicism had a theology, which isn't too popular anymore, but you can find people who call themselves traditional Stoics who adhere to the ancient Stoic theology.
And that means that there would be a god involved in this.
Yes. If you read Epictetus, he's constantly invoking the name of Zeus.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting. Your book, the cover, which I have a problem where I can't share the screen. I have a technical issue, but I'm going to put right here. I'm going to put a picture of it because it's very interesting. I wonder where that cover was inspired from.
It should be completely obvious. It is a profoundly intentional homage to the original cover of Zamm.
Well, we love homages to Pirsig, that's for sure.
And not too many people have noticed it, but the people who are interested in Pirsig, oh yeah, this looks very familiar.
We know right away. So you said that you went to the book launch of On Quality, which is a book I just love.
Yeah, it's funny. That was held in Exeter, and my wife and I used to live in walking distance of Water Street Books, where that event was. We're now about 20 minutes away in the middle of the woods. And I heard about it, so I've absolutely got to go. And I mentioned that Bob Pirsig knew nothing about Pyrrhonism, and my source for that is I asked Wendy Pirsig, did he know a thing about it?
Well, it's really interesting because Pyrrhonism and Buddhism, the way you've framed it, they really are related.
Mm-hmm.
And you also have an article about the spiritual practice, sophist spiritual exercise.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it's interesting because I think the case you're making is that letting go of patterns. And I want to read something from Pirsig, which is this little part here from Lila. there's a famous Zen poem that goes, while be living, be a dead man, be completely dead, and then do as you please, and all will be well. It sounds like something from a Hollywood horror film, but it's really about nirvana. The Metaphysics of Quality translates it. While sustaining biological and social patterns, kill all intellectual patterns, kill them completely, then follow dynamic quality and morality will be served.
Mm-hmm.
So in Pyrrhonism, there is sort of that relinquishment of, of categorization, of trying to believe there's an essence to things and being open to the, would you say, experience or the perception of reality?
Yes. Yeah. Pyrrhonism contains a rather technical language for dealing with these things. Um, so we, the appearances, these are forced upon us. I mean, we have no choice. I mean, there's a fireplace behind me, and there's wood burning in it. I can't make myself think otherwise. But there are a whole bunch of things that are non-empirical. They're not part of the appearances that we can believe. For example, the famous Stoic dogma, virtue is the only good. Right? And that's not empirical. You can't point to it. You can't look at it. It's entirely conceptual. In Pyrrhonism, believing there's a fireplace behind me is perfectly fine and normal. But get into, beliefs about abstractions. This is where we go awry. And what we need to do is not believe such things, not get hung up into believing in such things. And the technical term in Pyrrhonism for is dogma, which is a normal Greek word that we got the word dogma from in English. But the Greeks meant something a little bit different. We think of dogma as a belief with no rational explanation behind it. The Greeks were fine. You can have a rational explanation behind it and still, it's still dogma. In Pyrrhonism, though, dogma is a belief, a firm belief in something non-evident, like virtue is the only good.
Yeah, makes sense.
And another non-evident thing is things have essences, Aristotelian substances.
Yeah, which is, like the axiom of all of our thinking is what you're saying about that particular.
Yeah, all of our thinking starts falling apart if we question that assumption too hard.
So through the lens of Zen Buddhism and Pyrrhonism and metaphysics of quality, what's the way forward in this very strange world we're in these days? Would you say? I mean, I hope you don't mind me mentioning that you have a practice yourself, a Buddhist practice.
Oh yeah, sure. I continue to meditate. I haven't been to a Zen retreat in a number of years because I'm really much more focused on writing now. I used to live actually at several points in my life near a sangha. The last sangha I participated in was back when I lived in the Boston suburbs, and that sangha is led by Bob Waldinger now, who was and he was leading it when I moved away to New Hampshire. Bob is famous now for being the person who is in charge of the huge Harvard longitudinal study about health and well-being. And he also has a best-selling book out with whose title I cannot recall at the moment. And the Sangha was originally founded by my Zen teacher, James Ford, who is quite a prolific author. Um, but now I live in the woods of rural New Hampshire. um, and there was one point in my late 30s that I spent a brief but very informative stint at a Rinzai monastery in Kyoto. The monastery is Tofukuji, and I experienced very traditional, very tough, Rinzai practice. We got up at 2:50 in the morning, and morning service began at 3. To give you some idea of how strict this was.
So it was day-long meditation, I imagine.
Well, this was just their normal daily schedule. They ramped it up for a session, which was their retreats, and their normal daily schedule was about as tough as a typical American Zen meditation retreat. So I live in awe of the monks who did the Rinzai sessions. One thing though is these are all very young men.
Mm-hmm.
It has the part of the flavor of like a boot camp.
Mm-hmm.
It's very physically demanding. I was 37 years old at the time, and these 22, 25-year-old monks were really impressed that such an old man could do such a rigorous practice.
So you made it.
Yes, I made it. And Fukushima Keito Roshi, the abbot of the monastery, who's modestly famous, he offered me the opportunity to stay, and I said, yeah, I think I'll go back to the rat race. This is very difficult.
But you took something away from that, I'm sure, into the rat race.
I'm sure I did, but I'm not quite sure I could name it.
Maybe it shouldn't be named.
Yes. The Tao is unnameable.
Yes, it is. So you used in one of your writings, you said eventually, now this is something that's such a big issue for people, is uncertainty. And I think that the Aristotelian worldview is trying to, as we've been talking about, establish an absolute certainty, the certainty of essence. But I think, wouldn't you say one of the modern problems is the fact that there isn't an essence underneath these things to substantiate it? And therefore, really, when we think we're certain, we're actually not. And the uncertainty rears its head quite often.
We can establish reasonable levels of confidence, of certainty about the behavior of physical things in the world. I can be pretty confident about what is going on with this fireplace behind me, and how to make a fire, and how it's going to react, and what will happen if I put a wet log in versus a dry one. And we're real good at that. The problems come in when we get to higher levels of complexity. We live in a vastly more complex world than the ancients. What is, we live in a politically tumultuous time. What's going to be the impact of all of this? There's great uncertainty about it. And but from a Pyrrhonist perspective, the uncertainty that bothers us the most is the uncertainty about whether something is good or bad. And we cling to certainty, we like it, so we want to say, oh, this is certainly good and this is certainly bad. And you can have a field day with that if politics is your subject. And if you've spent much time talking to people who are obsessed with politics, you'll find that they're very upset chronically. This obsession with politics is not making them happy or doing anything good for their lives. It's just putting them into turmoil. So the Pyrrhonists would point this certainty about what is politically good and what is politically bad just makes people unhappy, and we are better off embracing that. Good and bad are matters of opinion. They do not exist in nature, and we can't really be certain of them. My favorite example here is the famous story of the Chinese farmer. You already know what I can tell by the smile because it's been told a million times. But the horse runs off. Oh, that's bad. Well, we'll see. The horse the mare comes back and it brings a stallion, and oh, that's really wonderful. Well, we'll see. And the story, continues in this pattern. It's a good example of we can never really be certain about what is good and what is bad, and we can't be certain about how things turn out. And the Chinese farmer in this story is content and comfortable with this uncertainty. And he has an equanimity so that he's not swayed by these ephemeral opinions of good and bad. He just deals with it as it comes. And this is an attitude of mind to be cultivated.
Mm-hmm. Would you say it's something like, in Pirsigian terms, finding the quality in every moment?
Yes, but that's also putting a value judgment on it, though. That this is quality and that isn't.
But wouldn't you say, though, that that the ancient idea of knowing what's good, like you said here, let me find it. We all appear to be run. I think this is it. Okay, so Robert Pirsig was more perceptive than Epictetus here when he said, and this is in your book review, which of another author, when he said, "What is good, Phaedrus? What is not good? Need we ask anyone to tell us these things? We all appear to be run by our own inner compasses about our desires and aversions. Neither Epictetus or anyone else can reliably convince us that what we think is desirable is not desirable." So the desire is automatic, let's say. Like quality exists in the moment. We know, we don't know what's good materially, and we don't know what's good permanently. But in the moment, we have desire or aversion.
Yes.
And that itself is unquestionable.
Exactly. This, for reasons we do not understand well,
exactly.
These arise in us. These are our own feelings. In ancient Greek, are pathos, and we have to deal with our pathos. And in Pyrrhonism, it's like we're interested. Don't let your pathos run amok with you. Just because that desire or aversion arose in you does not mean that this is definitively desirable or something you should be averse to.
Absolutely.
Now, of course, Epictetus, now he's going to say something different. He's going to say, there are things that are inherently desirable or things you should inherently be averse to. And if you are not having those feelings, you need to rework your feelings to have the correct feelings.
And we know where that kind of thinking can lead, right?
It's a popular standpoint.
So, Doug, tell us what you're going to be working on coming up here and how people can access your work.
Obviously, you can buy my book online.
And I'll be putting links to everything. But
Thank you. And I write periodic articles in my Substack, the name of which is Ataraxia or Bust.
great name. What does
Thank you.
ataraxia mean?
Ataraxia is a word Pyrrho introduced into Greek philosophy. It's more famously associated with Epicureanism, but Epicurus stole it from Pyrrho. Ataraxia means a state of being unperturbed. And its usage prior to its philosophic usage was to describe the ideal state for soldiers entering battle, which is something Pyrrho got to observe a lot of times because his life was dependent upon the Macedonian army. This is like the ideal mental state that gets talked about with like samurai,
Yeah, makes sense.
who are unperturbed about the very awful things that they're about to engage in. They're totally focused on what it is they need to do in that moment.
So the good for them in that moment is what they need to do, which may be very bad for whoever they're doing it to.
Could be. But the mental state here is what we're trying to focus on. And, it is a state of not being wrapped up in good and bad. It's, being in the moment. And
being in the moment with what you need to do, with your duty.
And not, disturbed that, things may end bad in the next moment.
So your advice to conclude is perhaps, I know that saying being in the moment is something everyone says, but it's true.
Right.
Like to be unperturbed in the moment and meet what is, meet what is versus what your preconceived notions tell you what it is.
Right. And this is no secret from Indian mysticism. I mean, the ancient Greek philosophers, this was common knowledge among them. The Western tradition lacks nothing here.
Oh, there's one last thing. I forgot, and I do want to include this. So let's talk. Let's talk about Arete. In the Homeric poems, this is from your writing. In the Homeric poems, Arete is frequently associated with bravery, but is more often associated with effectiveness. The man or woman of Arete is a person of the highest effectiveness. They use all their faculties, strength, bravery, and wit to achieve results. Arete involves all of the abilities and potentialities available to humans.
I believe I picked that up from Quito, the same author Pirsig did.
So this would be the approach, the stance, that perhaps would allow us to deal with all this uncertainty.
This is about how words changed meaning over time. So if you're dealing with like later works of Greek philosophy, particularly Stoic, so when they're talking about arete, they're talking about something that's very close, relatively close to what we think of Christian virtue. Whereas if you go farther back in time, the moral aspects of arete become less and less prominent, and other aspects of it become more prominent. So you go back to Homer, and the Arete is much more about, effectiveness. Is the knife good and sharp? It's an effective knife. It has virtue. uh, and that's not quite what we think of as virtue. We think of virtue as wisdom, temperance, courage, justice.
It makes sense. And you hear so much of the Christianity in what you just said.
Uh-huh. And they probably lifted it from the Stoics.
That makes sense. Okay, Doug, thank you so much. This has been
Excellent.
a wonderful talk.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I'll put all the links to your articles. Keep them coming, and really happy to talk to you. And good luck with your book and your next writing.
Okay, thank you.
And very nice to meet you.
Good meeting you too.